And now we are going to have a message from a person who also comes from the United Nations. His name is Dr. David Kay.
My name is David Kay. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you at this important conference, which marks the anniversary of the unjust detention of Senator De Lima, but also highlights the ways in which states and other actors around the world have been putting pressure on legitimate expression, on dissent, on public debate for many years. In these few minutes, what I would like to do is say a few words about the ways in which governments do impose that kind of pressure and the ways in which political leaders impose that pressure and use the tools that are at their disposal, tools of law enforcement, and also the tools of the platform of governance in order to implicate and to pressure legitimate dissent and other forms of debate. So let me say a few words to begin with about the nature of my mandate. The mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression rests in particular on Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. Article 19 guarantees everyone's right to maintain an opinion without interference. That is a strict right that's subject and can be subjected to absolutely no restriction or limitation. The Article 19 also protects and guarantees everyone's right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, and through any media. That is a robust right to seek, receive, and impart. This is language that was developed in the 1940s as part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and yet it almost assumes the development of a platform like the internet for speech. Seek, receive, impart, and regardless of frontiers. Now, of course, states may impose restrictions on the freedom of expression, but those restrictions under Article 19, paragraph 3, must be extremely limited. And there's a three-part test that we use in order to evaluate state restrictions. That three-part test requires that a state demonstrate, not that the victim of any kind of restriction demonstrate, but that the state demonstrate that three conditions are met. One, that the restriction is provided by law, that is, it exists in law and it's narrow and clear and precise enough to provide guidance and limit the discretion of the state. It's necessary and proportionate to achieve its aims, and the aims must be legitimate aims. Those aims must be, for instance, one of the protection of the rights or reputations of others, public order or national security, or public health and morals. Those are the only grounds on which expression may be restricted. So Article 19, which is binding on a country like the Philippines, is absolutely a robust statement of the freedom of expression and an absolutely robust statement of how governments can be limited in their implementation of restrictions. But over the last several years, particularly with the rise of the internet, we've seen states resort to a number of tactics in order to limit speech. Now, some of those restrictions are restrictions that are very much the same as they've been historically. The kind of pressure that we have seen imposed on journalists, on politicians, on opposition figures, on those simply in regular dissent that we've seen for generations. So, for example, the criminalization of dissent, the criminalization and censorship of adverse views, of criticism of government. Those kinds of tactics have long been used by governments in order to restrict public space, in order to restrict public debate. But they've also gone in different directions in recent years. So, for example, It's been a part of law for centuries, really, that a person could bring a claim of defamation where speech actually produces a real harm to one's reputation. And there's variation on the defamation claims and the law on defamation around the world. But there has been a claim, a cause of action for defamation for many, many generations. For several years, there's been an effort to limit criminal defamation, because criminal defamation is almost always a disproportionate attack on the freedom of expression. And there's been a global campaign to urge states to remove criminal defamation from their statute books. Unfortunately, even as governments have removed criminal defamation, and that is defamation that the state prosecutes, which is invariably used to limit debate and public speech, we've also seen a rise in civil defamation claims. And this is where individual politicians, government ministers, and others bring claims against individual journalists or those in dissent or others, and they sue them in court. We think of these as SLAPP suits, strategic litigation against public participation. These are suits that are designed to limit speech and debate. And this is a form of, to use the term from the conference, lawfare, that is extremely concerning, not only because it allows government ministers and others to bring suit in order to limit speech and debate, but also because the penalties often seek to bankrupt those who are speaking or writing or debating or raising criticism of government. These are just a few ways in which governments are seeking to implicate, to pressurize speech around the world. We see this in the Philippines, and we see this in many other places. We also see, as many of you know, the use of the internet as a space to, in a sense, flood the zone with disinformation, to flood the zone, to flood the internet with pressure on speakers, with disinformation, with attacks, particularly misogynistic attacks, which we've seen on the rise in all places, including in the Philippines. And I'm particularly concerned about that use of public space and of the private space of the internet in order to impose pressures on legitimate speech, on journalism. And at the end of the day, we have to remember this is not only about protecting specific journalists or specific media outlets or specific public figures. It's about protecting our rights as individuals, as citizens, to engage in public debate and to seek and receive information that sheds light on what government is doing in our names, with our tax dollars, and what it is doing in order to limit the freedom of our franchise, our ability to vote, to participate in public life. So I think we have the tools in international human rights law and in domestic law to fight back against these kinds of restrictions. And in closing, what I want to suggest is that I stand with you in the work that you're doing, that I stand with you in your efforts to fight against unjust restrictions on freedom of expression. And I look forward to working with you. And I know that my colleagues in the UN Special Procedure System look forward and stand ready to work with you as you fight for freedom of opinion and expression, for public participation, and for a free and open society. Thank you very much.